Hello, welcome to the FMCG, guys. This is Daniel Torres from Dwyer Partners, the executive search firm for director and above talents in FMCG and retail, joined, as always, by my co-host in Paris, Efrain Rosario. Hi, Efrain. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Daniel. Always good to be with you. Excited for our episode today.
Exactly, and especially because you share a common Coca-Cola background with him.
I do. Francesco and I have a shared bond over Coca-Cola. Although our paths never crossed, I'm looking forward to hearing about his experience there and what he's been up to since.
Yeah, exactly. So the Chief Commercial Officer of Sofidel, Francesco Pastore, is joining us today. Sofidel is an Italian multinational producer of tissue paper for sanitary and domestic use, and they're one of the main players in the category right now. Hello, Francesco. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you guys for inviting me on this important call. I'm so happy to see you, even if we are, let's say, through Zoom. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, welcome to the metaverse, Francesco.
Exactly. We need to be prepared for that very soon.
That's right. We're all adapting. This was just the first step. So, Francesco, thanks again for joining us. I'm really happy to have you here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Before we dive into the topics for today, for our audience, it would be great if you could just give us a brief intro into who you are, what your background is, what motivates you. And then, like I said, we'll jump into some specific questions on today's topic.
Absolutely. So again, thanks for inviting me. I'm Francesco. I'm Italian, as you can understand probably from my bad accent. I'm, let's say, a real FMCG boy, meaning 26 years of experience in this fantastic world or categories or channel. I'm currently responsible for the marketing and sales department of Sofidel. That is a privately known company started, let's say, the business in Italy, selling tissue paper across Europe and US. So we are one of the most, let's say, biggest supplier of tissue for hygienic and domestic use. Before that, various roles in sales, marketing, and general management in standard, let's say, CPG companies such as Procter & Gamble, Coke, and others. So this is who am I in 10 seconds.
And what are you looking after right now at Sofidel from a functional standpoint?
It's basically the marketing department and the sales department. We are divided by function and not by other typology of matrix strange organization. And therefore, I'm responsible for the business across different business units, such as the brand business, the private label, the away from home, and also an industrial, let's say, B2B semi-finished product. I forgot to mention before what motivates me. I think that is very, very recent trend because I was very much into people and leadership. I add on, not because we were talking about the metaverse, but definitely in the last 5 years, I think that digital is really transforming the way that we are doing things. So I'm getting even more, let's say, passionate about that topic, but also likely thanks to Sofidel, also to sustainability as well is another, let's say, something that motivates me a lot, especially in these days after COVID or within COVID. We don't know yet if it's finished or not.
Yeah. And about Sofidel, by the way, I was reading before on LinkedIn that you produce more than 1.4 million tons of paper each year. That's a lot of paper, no?
Yeah, do not ask me how many rolls per day or how many people per day, because it is a lot. It's a big number. So for sure, we are, let's say, an important players in Europe, but also a growing player into the US market. So it's definitely an exciting journey for the company that is an Italian company, but with a very ambition, let's say, grow mindset, not only in Europe, but even beyond that. So I'm proud to be part of this journey, being an Italian person. So it's good sometimes to work for a company that belongs to your country somehow.
So Francesco, one of the things I know that you're very passionate about is managing people, having teams under your organization. You've done that through your career. How do you define leadership, actually? What do you consider leadership to be? Because I think we're seeing more and more ambiguity around that term.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad that we booked 7 hours to go through this important concept. So jokes apart, for sure, we need to go beyond the framework for me when we speak about leadership, because it's such a broad meaning and a broad term. And if you allow me, I will start with a parenthesis. I know that sometimes I start with a parenthesis, meaning there is A person that I like a lot to read, even if he's an 18th century person, is a Prussian general. Maybe you know the name is Karl von Clausewitz. He's very famous for strategy, not for leadership, but I will use him because what he was saying about leadership is strategy is very similar to what I believe that leadership is about. And it's basically something that is a dynamic process. So leadership, as I said, is not a framework, it's something very dynamic. And therefore you need a kind of philosophy that constant, let's say, seed and rejuvenate, let's say, the broad meaning of it. So this to me is an important parenthesis because otherwise we will not be able to phrase it in the right way possible. So I want to start by saying that it's a dynamic process and is beyond a simple framework. After, let's say, having said that, I think that I born professionally in P&G. So for P&G, people and leadership is definitely at the core of everything that the company is doing. So building the business, but also building the organization is something that you learn day one. And basically the recipe or the formula was always trying to unlock the people potential to allow them to become better. So this is the mindset when I think about what leadership definition or what motivate you to guide or to lead people, because at the end of the day, it's always a privilege to do so. And therefore, going back again to the P&G kind of philosophy, I learned a lot about treating leadership and people like a real assets. It's not only brands, manufacturing facilities, but people is definitely the core of one of the most important assets. And therefore, you need to make sure that you is always at the top of your, let's say, activities or top of your priorities. And this is just to start with.
Absolutely. I mean, I heard a lot of interesting points with regards to, like you said, it's a process, it's a philosophy, and like you said, it's very closely related to being able to maximize one of the strongest assets that a company has, which is its people, and being able to not only just, like you said, nurture it, but also optimize and maximize the potential of that asset as well. So in your response, Francesco, you alluded to some of your prior experience at other companies. Would love to hear about your first leadership experience and just walking us through how you started to learn about leading people in a professional setting.
Yeah, let's say I start to lead or to manage people, let's say, after, let's say, a few years in my first job that was in Procter & Gamble. Of course, you are supposed to, let's say, organize a small bunch of people. So we are talking about really around 5 people, but definitely this is the first time where you have something that is beyond your, let's say, direct responsibility, because you need to go through people and not being, let's say, by yourself. And therefore, the first time, has been in that experience. And I have to say that, of course, I've been lucky to be trained a lot into that phase, and trained not only to the standard classical, let's say, training on a course, but also having great bosses or coaches that provide me the first, let's say, tools to try to be an effective person. At the end of the day,
I was just curious to know, like, the trainings that you received, were they before going into the leadership experience, or were they like as you started leading, you received trainings? Like, did you receive a preparation for that?
Yeah, as I said, I born professionally in P&G because it's a great company where you really have the opportunity to be trained on the job, but also on a class on the key fundamentals, let's say, skills that you need to have in both marketing, sales, but even more importantly in people management. So yes, I was able to get some training, let's say theoretical training before getting to the job, but then a lot, let's say, training on the job, meaning coaching from the boss, but also learning by doing, classical way of doing things. And therefore, the first time, of course, you are scared because it's the first time that you need to do something. I was also lucky because the environment, but also, let's say, my attitude has always been nicely, let's say, spot on this area. Honestly, I think that guiding people for me is a lot to do with your leadership style. And therefore, you go back to who you are in terms of person, how you can really make sure that you are supporting your team in a way that for them is motivating, but also is driving the performance to the entire organization and to your team. So to me, it's a lot to do with really adapting to the situation. So there is nothing to say one size fits all, especially in guiding people and in terms of leadership. But I think that my aha moment has been in Coca-Cola because, let's say, I had the opportunity to grow in a very large job, meaning moving from marketing to sales, but meaning to 30 people to 1,500 people. And when they gave me this opportunity, for me, even if I was already kind of 10 years of experience, I was a pretty scary to be into that position because 1,500 people is a lot. And therefore, you need to really test yourself in a way that you need to become professional, let's say, to a level that is really something that changed my professional, but also partially my personal life as well.
Mm-hmm. And from when was the first time that you actually got, I guess that it's one of the nice things of managing to give people the opportunity to grow. When was the first time that you were actually able to promote someone?
And again, I go back to my early days. And this is, by the way, is a KPI that I learned to track after I was in Coke. And the KPIs was how many people in your career have you been able to promote? And not only to one step, because one step maybe is not easier, but is depending on you. But if you do the right call and you see the person being promoted in other department or by other people, this is even more, to me, motivating because, of course, you move from being a manager to be a kind of mentor, no? And therefore, I was tracking these KPIs throughout my career. So I was very happy to have the opportunity to promote people when I was, especially in Coke, because let's say a large role in that organization. And to me, this is an important element that I want to stress again, the importance of tracking how many people you have been able to promote, not only from one step, but even more to other steps. So I give an example. I'm still mentoring people that was working with me 10 years ago, and I'm glad to see that they are, let's say, successful in their career. So I think that this is another caring element of the threat of a good leadership style to me, to make sure that you keep caring about the people that you promote one day, because at the end of the day, you was believing in them on some extent, and you are very happy if you see them grow also in other organization or with other person to be managed by. So
I love that point about making the transition from being a manager to being a mentor. And like you said, that goes beyond when you have a direct relationship with the individual to as they continue to advance in their careers. And it may be within the same company, or as I think we've all experienced, as people move on to different companies and different opportunities. So I think it's a really, really powerful point to drive home.
Yeah, I think that this is very valid for you as a leader, but also I think it is also an opportunity for you to grow as a person likewise. No? So you try to share, let's say, what you can with the people that you are more care of, but also you are trying to get also the same kind of breeze or kind of feedback or mentoring from people that can help you in succeeding your career. So it's not a one-way only, let's say, activities, it's a two-way activities that I'm investing a lot of time, because at the end of the day, we have not discussed about learning, but leadership is a journey, but also learning is another journey, especially in these days where the environment is so volatile and is so changing and is so transformational that you need to keep updating your skills. And therefore, also is important for you to be up to date to recent trend or recent challenges and so on and so forth. So it's definitely key to me to be an effective leader, also being a good mentors, but also receiving good, having in your network good mentor as well.
Yeah. So given the breadth of experience that you've had across companies, across both the marketing and the sales functions, would love to hear about your experiences with regards to diversity and managing people from various backgrounds, experience levels, gender and ethnicity, those kinds of things. And if there have been any key lessons or takeaways that you've had with regards to that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And for this one, I do have a framework. So allow me to go through one of the few that I'm using still a lot. That is the 6 different leadership style, or the situational leadership, how you want to call it. So I think that this for me is still a lighthouse that I'm using a lot, especially because, as you said, I'm moving around different sectors and culture. So the 6 leadership style are well known, I hope, by the broad audience. So you might be directive, you might be a visionary, you might be a pace setter or a coach. So there are 6 different styles. I think that the most important, let's say, learning that I can share is really to master those 6 of them, because you are asked to use all of them depending on the situation that you are in. And situation might be business situation, might also be people that you are guiding to. So for example, now in my team, I have people that are more, let's say, senior and therefore more autonomous, but also you might have people that are more junior, being promoted recently, and they need much more, let's say, guideline. Or think about a crisis situation where you need to act very, very fast. You cannot be a visionary saying, guys, there is a burning platform. What do you think if we meet us in 3 weeks to make a brainstorming? You need to be sure that you are actively, let's say, going through the crisis very, very fast. So this is a framework, 6 different leadership styles. In my career, I use them a lot because allow me really to navigate through different business challenges, but also different people that I need to guide them with. Of course, you tend to use a few of them more often. In my case, pace setting, for example, or coaching is the one that I use the most. But you need to force yourself to make sure that you master all of them, because you need, depending on, again, the situation, to change and to adapt your style. Maybe you need to be more visionary in one element, or you need to be more directive into another one. So my advice is to go beyond the 6 of them and try to stretch your comfort zone in order to be able to be successful accordingly to all of them, and not just the one that are more, let's say, familiar to you.
Yeah. And then probably actually related to that, in companies, we find people that are high performers, like they perform well. And then we have high potentials that normally perform well, maybe not as well as high performers, but they have more potential to grow, maybe because they're at an earlier stage of their career, or just they have more capacity or better prior experience to be promoted. How do you find that balance? Because obviously, if you're promoting someone else might not like that. How do you manage that conflict?
Yeah. I mean, for me, what is important to start saying is, for me, potential without performance is something that is not sustainable in the medium run. So I know that sometimes we tend to see a 9 metric saying, okay, this is the performance and this is the potential. You bracket people into 9 different boxes. But to me, is a mistake not having into the formula of the potential, the performance. Because at the end of the day, a person that is always potential but never deliver, for me, is not a potential. And this for me is an important statement, because otherwise we don't put the right things in perspective. The second, let's say, point that I want to make is, I think that the most important element is you need to be transparent with your people, but also you need to have a good diversity within your team, because you don't want to have a team of high flyer only, because you also need people that maybe are the bunch of the people that are happy with what they are doing. And therefore, the motivation comes from different things. Not only the motivation comes from promotion. If you are a high flyer, you want promotion. If you are happy with your current responsibility, you need to make sure that you give them the right key, because for them it's not motivating to be, let's say, into a career path that will move them to probably a different leadership jobs or different function or hierarchy. So the second point that I want to stress is making sure that you understand what the people motivate, and you cannot have all the people belonging to the same boxes, because the companies runs with a variety of people. Lastly, I think that the challenge that you mentioned is you end up in having 2 people with good performance and good potential, but you have 1 slot only. And this, of course, can be a trouble for the other person that has not been chosen, because at the end of the day, the funnel get not to be able to satisfy, let's say, all the opportunity you might have. It's always good to have a long bench. I will be glad to have this dilemma and having a trade-off between different people. I think that my recipe is always being transparent as much as you can. So I will not be afraid to go to the second person in a very candid way, saying, look, it's really true, you are great, you are on track, you have been successful, blah. But another person is slightly ahead of you, and therefore for now it's important that you understand that it's not your train, but another train will be available for you. Don't rush. So for me, communication and be honest and transparent is always a good formula to make sure that people understand. Of course, you need to promote a person that is really stunning, because if you do a mistake and you are promoting someone that for everyone is an asshole, of course, this will not be a right conversation with the others. But assuming that you are picking up the right call, with the second one, is always good to be open and transparent. And maybe you can be also brutal in bracket, to make sure that you make spaces in the organization for the talent, because sometimes the talent is stuck because the organization is not having, let's say, enough opportunities. So also making sure that you are able to provide opportunities is also another important task that you need to have in mind, because sometimes belong to you as well. Make this kind of tough call, not only in who promote it between the two, but also making spaces within the organization to making sure that the best have the opportunity to keep growing, but also adding value to the organization and to the business.
Yeah. I really appreciate some of the key elements that you mentioned in your response around having the ability to adapt, being agile, transparency, and really making an effort to understand how you adapt your leadership style based not just on the situation or the task, but the individual and his or her motivations as well. I think all those things have become even more critically important now in this age of COVID, whether that's pre, post, or during. How has that adapted your leadership style with regards to how are you engaging with your team during the current conditions, let's say, in regards to obviously having to go much more virtual in terms of how we engage as opposed to having physical proximity with your team?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. As everyone in the last few years, I spent 50% almost of my time, let's say, locked in an apartment. And it's not been easy, not only because we were through, let's say, a pandemic and through a real crisis, but also because you need to really shift the way that you are working with your people in a different way. Of course, I was having a lot of remote working even before, because my role is not, let's say, only in one single place, but is spread across different countries and geographies and business units, but still I was spending my 12 hours per day on a Teams. And therefore, leading 12 hours per day on Teams is completely a different thing compared to be in a hybrid, let's say, model before. So my my way of adapting my style has been to make sure to really active listening has changed a lot to my leadership skills, for example, because sometimes in meetings it's more easy to shortcut people. No, say, okay, got it, next. I think that with teams, you need to make sure that you really are much more, let's say, careful in understanding when the person has finished to talk, because the body language is more difficult to understand. So for me, active listening is one element to adapt your style compared to the physical. And the second one, I had to communicate much more, and communicate not only, let's say, the job to be done. Okay, we like to say job to be done, but the why. So I spend much more time on to share why we are doing things, rather than, guys, this is what we need to do. We are in a crisis, as we know, go for it. So trying to communicate also the why and allowing people to really to make sure that they have understood and they are part of the solution and not part of the problem. So maybe in a summary, in a nutshell, even if it's not easy for me to phrase it, but I will say listening and sharing much more why rather than task. I think that this has been the two things that I probably adapt the most in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And I think that, I was talking about this with someone yesterday, actually, that the fact that, like, talking about candidate attrition and so on, and people leaving the companies, there was somebody in the States, that the fact that you're not going into the office every day, like that sense of belonging, like it kind of fades away, especially probably like during the first lockdown, there was an increased sense of belonging, not because we were all on the same boat, but as time has gone by and it has lasted for 2 years, I think that the link of like your individual work to the mission of the company can become very diluted, no?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely so. It's been tough for everyone, especially for, let's say, who need to motivate people throughout the journey, because at the end of the day, you need to keep motivating them, even if it's not, let's say, a normal situation where you are in, or it's not a situation that you are comfortable, because there is a lot of change management as well. So we haven't discussed a lot about change management, but again, leading is also making sure that you keep adapting also or upgrading your team capabilities. I can tell you, I have many people in my broad organization without Teams or Zoom. You need to teach them, look, guys, this is how it works. And probably as a parents, we experience a lot because having our kids at home and with a teacher sometimes not able to guide them in the right way possible. I have to say that also it happened to me with some people in some circumstances, also trying to help them to the basic things, rather like this is a Teams meeting and therefore this is how it works. So you also need to not giving by granted the basic about that.
I think that's a great tie-in to our earlier question with regards to, particularly when you're leading larger teams like you are, and the diversity on those teams, because as you just alluded to, in some situations, you've got certain team members who are, let's say, less technologically savvy around things like Zoom and Teams, and you have to help them in that area. And then I think just the last point that Daniel raised, I think generationally, younger team members, people from the Gen Z and millennial generations, I think those individuals have a higher propensity for wanting to look for that transparency that you mentioned, and really understanding that why, not just the what needs to get done. So I think, it really speaks to your earlier comments around being able to adapt to those different individuals and to what their motivations are in terms of how you're leading them. And I think that's only been accentuated these last 2 years when we've gone through what we've all gone through with regards to having to really adapt to this new normal, if you will.
Absolutely. And for sure, it's not easy for people like me, that I'm not 30ish any longer. I'm 30 to 50 very soon. And leading a young generation, especially in these days, sometimes is a bit more challenging. When I was, I born in the command and control area, no? So my age was very easy to guide us, because this is what you need to do. Now is a lot to do with really understanding the in-depth motivation. And to the young generation, sometimes it's very challenging to make the bridge, because they are behaving in a very different way compared to my area. And you are right. In COVID, we really probably try to help each other a bit better, but it's not always straightforward to really understand what they have in mind. And also sustainability point of view is another important element for them. I just want to put in context, but let's say for that generation, sustainability and purpose-driven companies is becoming vital. So they don't want to work for somebody that is not providing what they are looking for. And they are very easy and happy to say, guy, bye-bye. I will jump into a different challenge that might be on any different definite reason. So definitely exciting days.
And in terms of, now that you mentioned sustainability, how can you, because I know that at Sofidel, that's a big thing on the agenda. How can you drive sustainability from the commercial function and marketing that you're leading? What impact can you have on that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we are in an industry, in a company where sustainability is likely so, is not a marketing trend. but it's something that was in the DNA of the company since 20 years already. So I think that this is important. I know that it's very trendy in these days and there is a lot of greenwashing. I've been very lucky to find out in this company that sustainability is at the core since, as I said, a couple of decades. And by the way, this helps a lot when you need to recruit people, especially in these days that is becoming trendy. But let's say, talking about more specifically my area of responsibility, we can help, let's say, our sustainability agenda with a concrete example that is alternative packaging. So, for example, 2.5 years ago, we almost changed the entire assortment to move from virgin plastic to paper packaging, but also some recyclable plastic as well. So this is in a marketing or business example where we completely changed our product portfolio, just moving out the plastic, because plastic is one of the elements that we want to, let's say, to reduce the way of using this. And this is, for me, is a good example. Beyond that, the company have an agenda of sustainability that is very, very much broad, because of course from manufacturing to, let's say, to supply chain, through all the function of the company, you need to improve the way that you are approaching not only the environment but also the society. So sometimes when we talk about sustainability, we have in mind just the environment. Of course, environment is important, and CO2 is one of the most important part of it, but still is beyond, in my way of looking, the environment, because, for example, social is also important, and therefore is attracting for the young generation to have this kind of program, because they want to join companies that are much more responsible into that area. I think it is very motivating for us to share in these days.
I think you hit on a really important point, which is that our employees, our team members are, at the end of the day, consumers, and like all of us, human beings. So doing not just what's good for me, but what's good for the world, what's good for my society, in terms of some of these things you mentioned around sustainability, is important to all of us, right? So, and it's, as you said, it's influencing not just their consumption choices, but it's also influencing where they choose to work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So until probably 5-10 years ago, we were not very actively looking in the balance sheet of the company, in the statement of the company, how much they was, let's say, behaving in sustainabilities. In these days, you want to know. You want to know what the company is thinking and how it's behaving around this. And I can tell you the question that I'm receiving from young generation have a very, very high fair share onto this topic, because for them is really key. And therefore it's good that they are helping also us, because talking again back to the diversity, you want to have this kind of people in your team, because they are also helping you to accelerate, but also to avoid some mistakes or to avoid some perception that you might be perceiving differently because you are coming from a different background. So I will envisage to have more of those kind of ambassadors, even if you are already very active on it, because you can expand and accelerate even further, not only the digital agenda, but even more the sustainability agenda. Are key trends for everyone, not only from the tech company, but also from the CPG companies like us. I think that is now vital to become or to master those elements as well.
I think, as you alluded to, I think we can all learn from each other, right? So I think those of us who have been working for quite a while, obviously we can impart the knowledge we've gained from years of experience, but at the same time, there's a lot we can learn from the younger generations as well, from our younger team members in regards to topics like sustainability and social impact and digital as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just looking a few days ago, a TED speech talking about the learning zone and the performance zone. We are much more focused into the performance zone, that is do the job, but the learning zone is even more becoming important in these days, because you need to be up to date. And honestly, if you are not willing to, let's say, to learn digital and sustainability, you are out of the market very, very soon, especially in our industry, even if we are not a tech company. So definitely one element to improve yourself is to get in touch with this kind of people, because they can teach you a lot.
Yeah. And Francesco, going back also to the beginnings of your career, and that's something that we're asking to all the guests of the FMCG Guys podcast, what advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career? So to your younger self.
This is probably the most challenging question, because it's so difficult to really to be up to date with all the trends that we are experiencing. I think that for me, the most important element is to find your purpose. And to me, this is probably the most simple but most powerful advice. You need to find your passion. At the end of the day, the work environment is what will define you, because you will be investing the majority of your time into that environment. And therefore, you need to understand what motivates you in terms of really purpose, and therefore also the passion. To me, this is the most straightforward one. The second advice that I will give to myself is to travel as much as you can. I mean, to me, travel is important because you get in touch with different culture, different way of looking at things. And therefore, the second one that I will encourage people to do even more is really travel. And probably differently versus my age, we were traveling into the West. Nowadays, you need to travel more into the East. So there is a new, let's say, region that will become the dominant region very soon. And therefore, if you can allocate sometimes also to understand that kind of culture will be even more important. So these are the two probably advice that I will give to myself. Define your purpose and travel as much as you can.
This was Francesco Pastore, Chief Commercial Officer at Sofidel, global leader in tissue paper, and currently one of the main players in this category. Efrain, interesting conversation. What are your main takeaways?
Yeah, lots of things to digest from our time with Francesco. For me, I think first and foremost was listening to Francesco talking about how he's learned to really adapt and master the 6 different styles of situational leadership, and really, in essence, customizing his approach to the individual and to the task at hand. I think to me, that's something that takes time to learn and to master, but it's time well spent. Secondly, I really enjoyed his comment around continuing to stay engaged with your team, even after they've left your let's say your line of command, if you will, and really thinking about that evolution from being a manager to being a mentor for those individuals in their long term, and staying engaged in their career progression. And then last, but certainly not least, I really love this comment around potential without performance not being sustainable. I think to me, for all business leaders, that's something that we can all take to heart, and thinking about that in order for our teams to really succeed, we need to have both high potential and high performance to drive the growth that we want.
Yeah, I agree on that. And I also think in terms of like mentors, and thinking it in a reverse way for the team members that Francesco's had, and for people that have this approach of mentoring former team members, it's also a great way to build your career, because whenever you're in doubt of a decision or you're looking for your next step, it's great to be able to go to those mentors, because they may be able to give you great advice, or they may be able to rehire you in a different position. So that part of like keeping your network open is super important. Well, I wanted to thank our listeners and also Francesco for joining us today. Please remember to follow our LinkedIn page if you're not yet. I hope you are. And also, if you ever have any feedback or whatnot, please get in touch with either Efrain and I, and we'll be more than happy to hear from you.
Be sure to check out our sister podcast, the CPG Guys, for some other great episodes on a variety of topics.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys.